My name is Isabela Torres, and I was only 15 when I realized my survival depended on myself alone. While other teenagers in my town of Oak Ridge worried about school dances and weekend plans, I was calculating how many hours I needed to work just to buy my own shoes for gym class. The breaking point came one rainy evening in sophomore year. I had been chosen for a science program in Chicago, an opportunity my teacher said could open doors to scholarships. All I needed was $250 for travel and fees. With trembling hands, I asked my parents at the dinner table if they could help. My father didn't even look up from his plate. "We're saving for Daniel's future," he muttered flatly, referring to my younger brother. My mother added with a sigh, "You'll figure something out, Isabella. You always do." I stared at them, realizing for the first time that my hard work and ambition weren't just invisible to them. They were unwanted. That night I cried silently into my pillow, the kind of cry that empties you out. But by morning, the pain had turned into something sharper: resolve. If no one was going to invest in me, then I would invest in myself. If you're watching this and you've ever had to fight for every inch of progress without family support, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because what happened next will show you that sometimes the strongest revenge isn't served in anger, but in proving you can thrive without them. The next afternoon, I walked into every shop and diner in our small downtown, asking for work. Most owners smiled politely and shook their heads, until finally Rosie, the tough but kind owner of Rosie's Grill, said she could use an extra pair of hands on weekends. That Saturday, while my classmates were at the football game, I was bussing tables, scrubbing plates, and pocketing my first honest paycheck. The pride of holding those crumpled bills outweighed every backhanded comment I'd ever endured at home. Soon, one job wasn't enough. By 16, I was juggling shifts at Rosie's Grill and the corner store across from our school. I'd rush from classes to the register, then home to finish homework by midnight, often with aching feet and tired eyes. But with every dollar I stashed into the savings account I had opened alone, no parents listed, no one to tell me how to spend it, I was building something that was mine. A future they couldn't take credit for, even if they tried. At the time, I thought independence would finally silence the comparisons to Daniel, the endless chorus of, "He has real potential." What I didn't know was that the independence I was so fiercely protecting would one day become the very reason my parents tried to tear my life apart. By the time I turned 16, my routine was already more demanding than most adults I knew. School from 8 to 3, a quick change of clothes in the locker room, then straight to the corner store where I worked 4-hour shifts stocking shelves and running the register. Saturdays and Sundays belonged to Rosie's Grill, where I spent 10-hour days bussing tables, wiping counters, and scrubbing dishes until my hands cracked from the hot water and bleach. While other kids spent their weekends at the mall or hanging out at the movies, I learned how to stretch my legs after standing for 12 hours and how to calculate tips down to the penny. Exhaustion became my constant companion, but so did determination. Every paycheck, no matter how small, went straight into my savings account. I refused to spend on things I didn't need. New shoes were purchased only when the old ones had holes. Clothes came from thrift shops, patched and repurposed until they could last another season. My parents never asked how I was managing, never offered a ride home after a late shift, never even acknowledged how hard I was working. What they did notice, however, was the balance of power shifting inside our household. For years, they had kept me in the shadow of my younger brother, Daniel. But as soon as I started building my own path, that shadow began to fade. And they didn't like it. Daniel was the golden child. My parents pinned every hope, every dollar, every excuse on him. He didn't work a single day in high school. Instead, he received a brand new car on his 17th birthday, while I was still riding the bus or walking in the rain. He spent his weekends at parties or soccer practice, bragging about how he didn't need to worry about money because family always provides. I kept quiet, though every word stung like a reminder of what I never had. That contrast only fueled me further. By senior year of high school, I had saved nearly $7,000, enough to cover college application fees, textbooks, and even part of tuition if I played my cards right. My teachers noticed the fatigue etched under my eyes, but also saw the results: straight A's, honor society, and recommendations that spoke of resilience as much as intelligence. I had built a reputation as the girl who worked harder than anyone else, who never asked for handouts, who seemed destined to carve her own way. Graduation was supposed to be a celebration of all that. And in a way, it was. But not in my family. The ceremony itself was beautiful. A spring evening under a wide sky, caps and gowns fluttering as we lined up to walk the stage. My name was called with honors, and I felt pride pulse through me as I crossed, diploma in hand, the culmination of years of sweat and sacrifice. But when I found my family in the crowd afterward, I should have known what was coming. My mother hugged me stiffly, congratulating me with a distracted smile. My father shook my hand like I was a business associate, not his daughter. And then came the words that sliced deeper than they realized. "We're so proud of you, but just remember, Daniel's big future is still ahead of him. Don't lose sight of what really matters." What really mattered to them was never me. At the joint graduation party they organized, supposedly for me and Daniel, the imbalance became impossible to ignore. The decorations, the speeches, the slideshow playing on the wall, all focused on Daniel's bright potential. He was still only finishing his junior year, barely passing his classes, but the spotlight shone on him as if he were the star. My moment of triumph was treated like a footnote in the story of his life. Even the cake had his name first. "Congratulations, Daniel and Lucy." Only they hadn't even bothered to change the name properly when transferring the design from another family's order, leaving a faint trace of someone else's celebration beneath the icing. People laughed awkwardly, but the message was clear. Even when I earned the spotlight, I wasn't meant to keep it. That night, I sat alone on my bed staring at the envelope of graduation money relatives had given me. It wasn't much, a couple $100 here and there, but I clutched it like proof that someone, at least, acknowledged my milestone. I promised myself that I would take every cent I earned, every scrap of acknowledgement I could gather, and turn it into a life that could never be diminished again. College was my escape route, and I refused to let anything derail it. While my parents continued to funnel resources into Daniel's future, I calculated tuition costs, scholarships, and housing options. I created spreadsheets to plan every expense, every hour of work I would need to cover the gaps. I didn't expect them to help, and they didn't disappoint. They didn't even ask about my plans. By August, I packed my thrift store suitcases and boarded a bus to the state university 2 hours away. It wasn't the dream school I once imagined, but it was mine. For the first time, I felt a sense of freedom. No one could tell me I didn't deserve to be there, because I had earned it all myself. As I settled into my small, drafty dorm room, I looked out the window at the sprawling campus. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of possibility instead of limitation. But I also knew something else deep inside. My independence, the thing I cherished most, was already planting seeds of resentment in my family. Seeds that would one day grow into something darker than I could have ever anticipated. The first semester of college tested me in ways I hadn't expected. I had imagined a steady rhythm of classes, study sessions, and part-time work, but the reality was harsher. My dorm room, the smallest in a crumbling building at the edge of campus, barely fit my twin bed, a desk, and a suitcase full of thrift store clothes. The radiator hissed constantly without warming the air, and I often fell asleep wearing 2 sweaters under my blanket. Still, I reminded myself every night, this was freedom. I had built this life brick by brick, even if the bricks sometimes felt too heavy to carry. Within the first week, I had secured a job at the campus library. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid enough to cover groceries. On weekends, I took the 2-hour bus ride back to my hometown to keep my position at Rosie's Grill. The back and forth was exhausting, but I couldn't afford to give up the income. My days became a blur of lectures, double shifts, and stolen hours of studying in the early morning before the campus woke. Other students decorated their rooms with posters and string lights, joined clubs, and went to parties. I decorated mine with stacks of textbooks and a wall calendar filled with shifts and deadlines. Loneliness was a constant ache, but there was no room for self-pity. Every hour mattered. Every dollar mattered. And yet, even as I struggled, I felt a growing sense of pride. For the first time, my life wasn't tethered to the weight of my parents' judgment. My paycheck, however small, was mine. My grades, my savings, my future, all mine. The contrast with Daniel, however, became impossible to ignore. While I rode buses between towns and worked late into the night, his social media painted a different picture. He posted photos of his brand new apartment near campus, paid for by our parents, decorated with furniture they had bought him. He boasted about weekends at the lake house of a fraternity friend, about parties where no one worried about shifts or exams. Every time I scrolled past one of his smiling photos, I felt a mix of anger and exhaustion. He lived a life of ease built on the sacrifices I had never been offered. Phone calls home only sharpened the divide. My mother gushed about Daniel's connections, his bright future, his potential to climb higher than anyone else in the family. "Have you joined any clubs, Isabela?" she asked once, her tone dripping with expectation. I bit my tongue instead of explaining that clubs were luxuries for people who didn't have to work 60 hours a week just to survive. By sophomore year, I had settled into my rhythm, but the wait was relentless. To stretch my budget, I learned to meal prep with beans, rice, and vegetables that could last a week. I studied in the library late into the night, the hum of fluorescent lights my constant companion. There were nights when exhaustion broke me, when I cried quietly into my pillow, wondering if it was worth it. But each time, I reminded myself of what awaited me if I gave up. A return to dependence on parents who had never once believed in me. That thought kept me moving, even when my body begged to stop. During that time, I found unexpected allies. Lisa, a fellow student in my economics class, became my closest friend after we bonded over our shared exhaustion. She worked 2 jobs too, waitressing and tutoring on the side. We traded tips on budgeting, split the cost of textbooks, and covered each other's shifts when one of us had an exam. "Some people party their way through college," Lisa told me once, "but we're building something real. One day, this will all make sense." That line stuck with me, because in the middle of my exhaustion, I needed to believe she was right. By junior year, my persistence started to bear fruit. An internship at a local real estate firm opened doors I hadn't expected. Professor Andrade, who taught my urban economics course, noticed my dedication and recommended me to one of her former colleagues. Suddenly, I was learning about property markets, development trends, and investments, things that felt tangible, powerful. For the first time, I could see a path that wasn't just about survival but about growth. I threw myself into it, balancing the internship with my library job and classes. Sleep became even scarcer, but the spark of purpose made the exhaustion easier to carry. I learned negotiation strategies, market research, and how to spot undervalued properties. Every day at the firm was a lesson in how to transform effort into something lasting. Meanwhile, Daniel coasted. His grades were average at best, but my parents celebrated every minor achievement as if it were monumental. When he passed a single midterm he had nearly failed, they threw him a celebratory dinner. When I called to tell them about my internship, my mother changed the subject within minutes. Holidays were the hardest. Thanksgiving of my junior year, the family dinner turned into a 20-minute monologue about Daniel's bright opportunities, with my parents beaming at him across the table. When I tried to share news about my internship, my father nodded distractedly before asking Daniel about his plans for spring break. I sat quietly, pushing food around my plate, wondering how many more years I would have to fight for recognition that would never come. That night, back in my drafty dorm room, I realized something important. I didn't need their approval anymore. What I needed was to keep building, to keep proving, to myself, not to them, that my life was worth more than the scraps of attention they had ever given me. It was in that moment, staring at the peeling paint on my dorm wall, that I set a new goal. I wouldn't just graduate. I would own something. A home, a property, a piece of the world that could never be taken from me. I didn't know then how much that goal would change everything, or how deeply it would threaten the fragile balance of my family. Graduation came with far less ceremony than I had once imagined. My parents didn't even attend. They claimed Daniel had an alumni networking event they couldn't miss, as if his half-hearted social climb was more important than my years of sacrifice. I accepted my diploma with Lisa cheering loudly from the stands, and I told myself I didn't need anyone else. Still, as I moved the tassel from one side of my cap to the other, a quiet ache sat in my chest. I wasn't invisible anymore. I was unstoppable. But I still wished in some corner of my heart that my family could see it. My internship at Alvarez and Maxwell Realty quickly transformed into a full-time position. Terry Maxwell, my mentor, saw something in me others had overlooked. She handed me responsibilities that most new hires wouldn't touch for years: drafting property assessments, negotiating small contracts, sitting in on client meetings. "You've been fighting uphill your whole life," she told me one afternoon after I closed my first rental deal. "That makes you sharper than anyone who's ever had things handed to them." I clung to her words. The pay wasn't luxurious, but compared to scraping by in dorms and diners, it felt like freedom. I moved into a tiny studio apartment, just 400 square feet, barely enough room to turn around without hitting a wall. But it was mine. No parental names on the lease. No debts owed to anyone but myself. Every night I fell asleep staring at the ceiling, thinking, this is the first step toward more. Still, my parents' disapproval hung over me like a storm cloud. Phone calls were rare, but when they came, they followed the same pattern. My mother's clipped voice would ask how I was, but quickly pivot to Daniel, his fraternity events, his trips, his internships that always seemed to appear out of thin air. "He's got such potential," she said once, as if it were a mantra. When I mentioned I was studying for my real estate license, she only replied, "That sounds nice." Nice was the word she used for things she didn't respect. So I threw myself deeper into work. I studied late into the night, memorizing laws and regulations, learning every angle of property contracts. 6 months after graduation, I passed my licensing exam on the first try. The next day, Terry placed a bottle of champagne on my desk. "You're official now," she said with a grin. "Go show this city what you're made of." From that moment, my world shifted. I began taking on my own clients under Terry's supervision, helping young families find starter homes, guiding first-time buyers through mountains of paperwork. Every closing was a victory, not just for my clients, but for me. With each commission check, my savings account grew. I began keeping a second spreadsheet just for my future home fund, watching the numbers climb month by month. To accelerate my savings, I started a side hustle helping students and recent graduates find rentals. It wasn't glamorous, but word spread quickly that I had a knack for uncovering affordable, hidden gems. I charged modest fees, but with volume, it added up. Soon, I was working 7 days a week again, but this time it felt different. These hours were building something real, something permanent. Sandra Wilson, another senior agent at the firm, noticed my drive. She took me under her wing, teaching me about investment properties and long-term wealth building. Sandra owned 12 rental homes by the age of 50. "Don't just sell properties," she advised. "Own them. Become your own best client first." Those words lodged in my mind like seeds. I wasn't just chasing survival anymore. I was building wealth, building proof that I had carved out something without a single ounce of their help. Meanwhile, Daniel's world seemed to spin in the opposite direction. He had scraped his way through college with mediocre grades, but our parents painted every step as brilliance. When he graduated, they bought him a new car to set him up for success. He still had no clear career path, but I noticed his social media shifting. Fewer party photos, more vague captions about big opportunities. The more I accomplished, the more their silence cut. When I told my parents I'd closed my first major sale, they barely responded. When Daniel posted a blurry photo from a networking trip, my mother commented 5 heart emojis. It was clear, no matter how high I climbed, their attention would never turn my way. But one person did notice: my Aunt Judy. She called me one evening, her voice warm and proud. "Isabella, Your uncle and I were just talking about you, she said. We're amazed at what you've done for yourself. Your mother might never say it, but we see it. We're proud those words carried me through the hardest weeks. By 23, I had saved more than most people twice my age. My spreadsheets showed I was ahead of schedule for my first down payment. I began scouting neighborhoods, studying markets like a detective. I wasn't looking for something flashy. I wanted a house with bones I could fix. Something undervalued, something I could transform with my own hands. That's when I found it. A modest 3-bedroom bungalow in a neighborhood just beginning to revive. The kitchen was avocado green, the bathroom covered in cracked pink tile, the carpet a relic of the 70s. Most buyers had turned away in disgust. But I saw the solid foundation, the new roof, the big backyard. I saw potential. The asking price was high, but I came armed with research, comps, and confidence. I offered 12% below asking, and after tense negotiations, the sellers accepted 7% under. The day I signed the closing documents, I fought back tears. Don't worry, the closing agent said kindly, mistaking my emotion for fear. The first house is always overwhelming. I'm not worried, I whispered back. I'm proud. That night, I walked through the empty rooms of my first home, my footsteps echoing against the bare walls. It smelled of dust and old carpet, but to me, it smelled like victory. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something no one could take away. I didn't know it then, but this house, my house, would become the spark that turned my parents' simmering resentment into open war. The day of my housewarming barbecue dawned bright and warm, with sunlight pouring into the kitchen I had painted myself just weeks earlier. The avocado green cabinets were gone, replaced by crisp white doors with brushed metal handles. The yard, once overrun with weeds, now had neat flower beds and a new patio where I had set up tables and chairs. I wanted this day to mark not just the completion of my first year as a homeowner, but the celebration of everything I had built with my own hands. Lisa arrived early to help, balancing 2 grocery bags against her hip. Whatever happens today, she said, arranging vegetables on a platter. Remember this. You've won. They can't take that from you. I smiled, but inside my stomach churned. Part of me still hoped that maybe, just maybe, my parents would surprise me with pride instead of criticism. By early afternoon, guests began to arrive. My Aunt Judy and Uncle Marco came first, carrying a beautifully wrapped toolbox as a gift. For the woman who can fix anything, Uncle Marco said warmly, pressing the box into my hands. They had always treated me with respect, never once minimizing my efforts. Their presence felt like armor. Soon, my colleagues from Alvarez and Maxwell trickled in, mingling with neighbors and friends. My mentors Terry and Sandra both came, and Sandra even raised a glass of champagne before the food was ready. To Isabela, she said, smiling at me. Few people your age could have pulled this off, and you've done it with grace, grit, and vision. Applause followed, and I felt a rush of gratitude. But by 3 o'clock, the guests I dreaded most still hadn't appeared, my parents and Daniel. I had just finished showing a group of colleagues the refinished bathroom when the low growl of an SUV pulling into the driveway caught my attention. My mother stepped out first, her lips pressed into the tight smile she reserved for social events she considered beneath her. My father followed, holding a small gift bag that looked hastily assembled. Daniel sauntered out last, immediately making a beeline for the cooler of drinks without saying hello. Lucy, my mother said, her voice dripping with condescension as she air-kissed the space near my cheek. This neighborhood is certainly developing. I had to double-check the address. I didn't expect you here. It's an up-and-coming area, I replied evenly. Property values have already gone up 12% since I bought in. Her only response was a clipped, before she pushed past me into the house, scanning the rooms as if looking for flaws. My father handed me the gift bag with an awkward pat on the shoulder. Inside was a scented candle, the clearance sticker still stuck to the bottom. Congratulations on the house, he muttered. It's a cute starter place. I thanked him politely, swallowing the sting. Years of practice had taught me how to mask disappointment. As I guided them through the house, my mother's commentary was a steady drip of backhanded compliments. "You painted these cabinets yourself?" "Well, I suppose that's one way to save money," or "This bathroom is creative, considering the budget constraints." Then, while peering into the spare bedroom, she added with a smirk, "It would make a nice nursery someday. Though I suppose you're too focused on work for that sort of thing." I held my tongue, smiling thinly. But it wasn't until I overheard my father speaking with Uncle Marco that the real blow landed. "Kevin's graduation is next month," my father said, his tone proud. "We've always planned to set him up with a property afterward, give him time to find his footing before committing to a career I froze. My parents didn't own investment property. We had lived in the same modest house my entire life. What property could they possibly mean?" A chill ran through me. The barbecue itself moved forward pleasantly for the rest of the guests. Plates filled with grilled meat and salads, laughter bubbled across the yard, children darted around the garden. Yet the tension radiating from my immediate family was impossible to ignore. Daniel had already helped himself to 3 beers and was loudly retelling college stories to anyone who would listen. My mother sat stiffly at the table, watching me with narrowed eyes. When everyone had eaten, I stood with a glass of wine and clinked it gently. The conversations hushed, and I felt dozens of eyes turn toward me. "I want to thank you all for being here today," I began. "A year ago, I signed the papers for this house. Some people thought it was too ambitious for someone my age, but I believed it was possible, and every one of you supported me in some way. This home isn't just about walls and a roof, it's about proof. Proof that with hard work and determination, we can build the life we want, no matter where we start." Applause broke out, glasses lifted in cheers, and for a moment, warmth filled the air. Then my mother stood. Her chair scraped harshly against the patio stones, and silence rippled through the yard. Her face was flushed with something between rage and humiliation. "You stole your brother's future," she shouted suddenly, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You stole it and you flaunt it as if you're proud." The yard fell into stunned silence. Even the birds seemed to stop singing. "What are you talking about?" I asked, my voice low but steady. "This house," she spat. "This neighborhood. We've been watching it for years, planning it for Daniel's future. You knew that. You used your real estate connections to snatch it away." My father stood too, nodding. "We had plans for Kevin. You knew we would help him buy after graduation. You swooped in and ruined everything." I looked at Daniel, who leaned back smugly, smirking into his beer can. "That's absolutely not true," I said firmly. "I found this house through my own research." "You never once mentioned any plan to me. Not once. You should have known," my mother snapped. "Any daughter with loyalty would have consulted her family before making such a selfish move." I felt heat rise to my cheeks, but my voice remained steady. "Get out," I said quietly, then louder. "All of you. Leave now." "You're choosing this house over your family?" she gasped. "No," I replied. "I'm choosing my dignity over your lies." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Aunt Judy rose, her face blazing. "Diane, I've held my tongue for years, but enough is enough. Isabela has worked herself to the bone while you handed everything to Daniel. And now you dare accuse her of theft? Shame on you." My mother sputtered, but had no retort. My parents gathered their things, Daniel trailing lazily behind them, and left without another word. As the SUV pulled away, the silence broke. My guests rallied around me, offering comfort and outrage in equal measure. Sandra squeezed my shoulder. "Don't let this ruin what you've built." What I saw today wasn't family love. It was manipulation. Later, after everyone had gone, I sat alone on my patio, staring at the house I had worked so hard for. The victory felt hollow, tainted by their accusations. What I didn't know then was that this confrontation was only the opening act. The real battle was still to come, and it would reach far beyond the walls of this house. The week after the barbecue, I buried myself in work, hoping to drown out the memory of my mother's rage echoing across my backyard. I told myself it had been an isolated outburst, a moment of humiliation she'd regret once she cooled down. But the silence from my parents in the days that followed was heavier than any argument. Clients noticed my distraction. I smiled and carried on with showings. But at night, I replayed the confrontation again and again. My mother's finger stabbing the air, my father's nod of agreement, Daniel's smirk. I tried to shake it off, but a part of me knew this wasn't over. I was right. It was a Wednesday afternoon when the storm hit. I was at the office, preparing documents for a closing, when the receptionist called me to the front desk. Standing there was a man in a wrinkled gray suit, his expression flat, professional. "Isabela Torres?" he asked. "Yes," I replied cautiously. He handed me a large manila envelope. "You've been served," he said simply, before turning on his heel and walking away. The envelope felt heavier than paper should. My hands trembled as I carried it into a conference room, away from the curious glances of my colleagues. I opened it with a shaky breath and began to read. I thought it would be a mistake. Some mix-up. But no. My parents, Thomas and Helena Torres, were suing me. The words on the page blurred as I skimmed, disbelieving. Count 1. Unjust enrichment through exploitation of familial knowledge. Count 2. Intentional interference with expected inheritance. Count 3. Misappropriation of family opportunity. It read like fiction. They accused me of deliberately using my real estate expertise to intercept a property they had intended for Daniel. They claimed I had stolen an opportunity that belonged to him, even demanding financial restitution. I flipped to the relief sought section, the part that spelled out what they wanted from me. My stomach dropped. Option 1, forced sale of my home, with all proceeds to be transferred to Daniel Torres. Option 2, a payment of $200,000 to compensate for his lost future. I stared at the pages, numb. My parents hadn't just humiliated me in front of family and colleagues. They were trying to take everything I had built. My hands shook so violently that the papers slipped from my grip and scattered across the table. I sank into the chair, pressing my palms to my face, willing myself not to cry. But the tears came anyway, hot, angry, relentless. For years, I had worked myself to exhaustion to prove I could stand on my own. And now, instead of pride, they had turned their bitterness into a weapon sharpened against me. I don't remember leaving the office, only that I ended up in my car in the parking garage, sobbing until my throat was raw. When I finally calmed enough to think, I called the only person I trusted with this truth, Aunt Judy. "They did what?" she exclaimed when I explained through broken words. "Isabela, this is beyond dysfunction. This is delusion. They won't get away with it. I know someone who can help." The next morning, true to her promise, I was sitting in the office of Barbara Martinez, a family law attorney with sharp eyes and a reputation for dismantling frivolous cases. "I've reviewed the complaint," Barbara said after a long silence, flipping through the documents. "In 20 years of practice, this is one of the most baseless lawsuits I've seen. But frivolous doesn't mean harmless. We'll need to fight this carefully." She explained the path ahead, filing a response, possibly going to court, gathering evidence to dismantle their claims. "The good news," she added, "is that you have an impeccable record of independence. You've supported yourself since you were 16, with no financial assistance from them. That's a powerful counter-narrative." "And the bad news?" I asked, my voice small. "The bad news is cost. Even a frivolous case requires time, filings, responses. My retainer will drain a chunk of your emergency savings. And it will be stressful." I thought about the money I had been saving for home improvements, about the weekends I had worked double shifts just to build a cushion. All of it, now at risk. But when I imagined my parents taking my house, the decision was clear. "I'll fight," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can't let them take this from me." Barbara gave a short nod. "Good. Then we'll fight." The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and strategy sessions. Barbara helped me draft a response denying every allegation and filing a counterclaim for legal fees and harassment. At night, I organized my financial history. Bank statements showing deposits from my teenage jobs, tax returns I had filed independently, rent receipts from the years before I bought my home, and the mortgage documents proving I had qualified on my own merit. The emotional toll was worse than the financial one. Every time I opened my inbox, I half expected another ambush, another letter, another accusation. My work began to suffer. Clients asked if I was all right, and I smiled tightly, blaming allergies or fatigue. The truth was harder. My own parents had turned me into their enemy. One evening, Barbara called with a disturbing update. "We've uncovered something," she said. "Daniel has been telling people for months that your parents were going to buy him a house in your neighborhood as a graduation gift. He even took friends on drives, pointing out properties he said would be his. They've built this narrative together, but the timing doesn't line up. He didn't say anything until after you'd already bought your house." I pressed the phone to my ear, speechless. "They're desperate," Barbara continued. "Their financial records show heavy debt. Supporting Daniel's lifestyle has drained them. You became the scapegoat because your independence proves their favoritism and their failure." That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, staring at the lawsuit spread across the surface. The house around me, the painted cabinets, the refinished floors, the fresh flowers from my garden, all of it symbolized years of sacrifice. And now, because of envy and entitlement, my parents wanted to strip it from me. I realized then that this wasn't just about property, it was about control. For years, they had ignored me, minimized me, treated me as less than Daniel. Now that I had proven I could succeed without them, they couldn't stand it. I wiped my tears, straightened the papers, and whispered to myself, "They will not win." Not this time. The envelope never left my kitchen table. Even after Barbara had filed the first response and assured me that we were on the offensive, I kept the lawsuit documents spread out like a grotesque centerpiece, a constant reminder that my life was under attack. Each time I passed by, the words leapt out at me: unjust enrichment, misappropriation, inheritance interference, legal terms twisted into weapons by the people who should have been my first protectors. Barbara had warned me that frivolous didn't mean easy. "We'll win," she said firmly, "but they'll try to wear you down. That's the real tactic. Exhaust you until you surrender." Surrender was not an option. The first step was evidence. Barbara gave me a list, and I attacked it like another job. Bank statements going back to my first teenage paycheck at the diner. Tax returns filed independently since I was 17. Rent receipts from my college years, every utility bill in my own name, loan statements, scholarship award letters, mortgage application documents. By the second week, I had filled 2 boxes with the story of my independence told in paperwork. But documents alone weren't enough. We needed people. Barbara reached out to my former employers, who wrote detailed statements describing my work ethic. Professors provided letters testifying to my academic achievements without parental support. Even Darlene, the diner owner who had given me my first job, hand-wrote a glowing account of how I had walked in at 16, determined to work for my future. "You're building an army," Aunt Judy said one evening, helping me sort papers into labeled folders. "They've tried to rewrite history, but you're writing it back." Meanwhile, Barbara was digging into my parents' financial history. What she found made my stomach twist. My parents had been drowning in credit card debt for years, much of it linked to Daniel's expenses, tuition bills, luxury clothes, vacations he flaunted online. The so-called family resources they claimed I had stolen had never truly existed. Their savings accounts were nearly empty, their retirement funds barely touched. The promise of a house for Daniel had been fantasy all along, a bubble propped up by debt and denial. Barbara's strategy became clear: dismantle their claims while exposing the truth. She filed requests for discovery that forced my parents to hand over records they'd tried to keep hidden. Each new document painted a sharper picture: their financial desperation, their favoritism, their need to cast me as the villain to protect Daniel's golden boy image. The emotional toll was harder to measure. At work, I forced smiles, pushed through meetings, and focused on clients. But at night, I sat awake staring at the ceiling, my chest tight with anxiety. Some mornings, I could barely summon the strength to get dressed. I found myself snapping at Lisa, who had done nothing but support me, and apologizing through tears minutes later. "You're human," she told me gently. "Anyone would be falling apart under this. But you're still standing." I wasn't sure if standing was enough. One Saturday afternoon, while organizing receipts, I found an old birthday card tucked into a box of papers. It was from my mother, the year I turned 10. "To my clever daughter, may you always chase your dreams." The handwriting felt like a message from a stranger. I wondered when that mother had disappeared, or if she had ever existed at all. Barbara insisted on preparing me for testimony. "They'll try to rattle you," she warned during our mock sessions. "Their lawyer will poke at your independence, suggest you used family resources in hidden ways. You must stay calm. Facts are your weapon," so we rehearsed. Over and over, I practiced answering questions, keeping my tone steady, never rising to anger. She reminded me that juries and judges responded to credibility, not emotion. "Your story speaks for itself. Trust it." One evening, after hours of rehearsal, I slumped in my chair, exhausted. "Barbara," I admitted, "what if I'm not strong enough? What if I freeze on the stand?" She leaned forward, her gaze steady. "Isabela, you've been strong enough since you were 16. You don't survive what you survived. You don't build what you built, without strength. The courtroom is just the place where everyone else finally sees it." Her words lodged in my chest like a spark of light in the darkness. The community around me seemed to sense what I was enduring. Colleagues quietly shifted schedules to ease my workload. Clients sent kind notes. Even neighbors dropped off small gestures: cookies, flowers, words of encouragement. An anonymous letter arrived one day. "Your mother has been driving by your house, taking photos. Stay strong. People admire what you've built." The note was unsigned, but the solidarity was clear. As the first court date drew closer, my nerves hardened into resolve. I walked through my house at night, running my hand over the smooth kitchen counters I had refinished, the walls I had painted, the garden I had planted. Every corner was proof of my labor. Every detail whispered, "This is yours. You built this." On the eve of the hearing, I laid out my navy blue suit, the one I reserved for major client meetings. I ironed it carefully, smoothing every wrinkle, imagining the day ahead. In the mirror, my reflection looked tired, eyes shadowed from weeks of stress. But beneath the exhaustion, I saw something else: steel. "They want to break me," I whispered to my reflection. "But I won't let them." That night, I slept fitfully. Dreams tangled with courtroom scenes and my mother's angry voice. Yet when morning came, I rose with clarity. My parents had underestimated me my entire life. Tomorrow they would see the truth, not the version they had written, but the one I had lived. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and disinfectant, a mix that clung to the polished wooden benches and echoed with the shuffle of nervous footsteps. I had been here before for client property closings, but this felt entirely different. This wasn't business. This was my life. Barbara walked beside me, rolling a small suitcase of documents, each box labeled neatly with evidence. "Breathe," she reminded me as we passed through security. "This is just the opening act. Nothing is decided today." Still, my palms were damp and my heartbeat thundered. I spotted my parents across the hall almost instantly. My mother was dressed in a pale suit, her chin lifted high as if she were about to accept an award. My father stood beside her, stiff and uncomfortable, while Daniel lounged a few feet behind them, scrolling through his phone, already bored. They didn't even glance in my direction. When the bailiff called the case, we entered the courtroom. The judge, a stern woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, adjusted her glasses as she read the case summary. The moment she spoke, the room stilled. "I've reviewed the filings," she began. This is an unusual case. Parents suing their own daughter for purchasing property. Let's proceed accordingly. My parents' lawyer, a young man who looked nervous even before speaking, began his argument. He painted me as manipulative, claiming I had used familial knowledge to secure a property meant for my brother. He repeated the phrase stolen opportunity like it was a weapon. The judge stopped him mid-sentence. Are you suggesting, she asked, her tone razor-sharp, that the defendant was legally obligated to avoid purchasing property simply because her parents might have considered that neighborhood? The lawyer stammered, fumbling with his papers. Your Honor, there was an understood arrangement. An arrangement that was never communicated? She pressed. Silence stretched until he muttered something vague about family loyalty. The judge's frown deepened. When Barbara rose, the air shifted. She didn't waste time with flowery words. She rolled one of the boxes to the front of the bench and opened it, pulling out a stack of papers. Your Honor, she said firmly, we have documented proof that Ms. Torres has been financially independent since she was 16 years old. These records, bank statements, tax returns, employment letters, show a complete history of her earnings and expenses. Her parents contributed nothing to her education, nothing to her housing, nothing to her down payment. Their claim rests entirely on a narrative created after the fact she placed the papers in front of the judge, the sound echoing in the silent room. Then came my turn. My legs trembled as I walked to the witness stand. Barbara's voice guided me gently as she asked about my first job, my decision to support myself, my years of juggling work and school. I spoke carefully, truthfully, explaining how I had saved, planned, and purchased my home. Across the room, my mother's expression tightened with every word. My father shifted uncomfortably, eyes downcast. Daniel yawned. The cross-examination was weak. Their lawyer tried to imply that I had used family resources in hidden ways, but when pressed for examples, he had none. Which family resources? Barbara asked sharply. Please name one bank account, one loan, one signed check. The lawyer had nothing but vague insinuations. Then my mother testified. She spoke with dramatic conviction about family traditions, about how daughters were supposed to consult parents before major decisions, about how I had betrayed Daniel's future. She even claimed that I had known for years they were planning a property for him. Barbara's questions sliced through the performance. Mrs. Torres, do you have documentation of these plans? Financial accounts? Realtor correspondence? Savings statements? My mother hesitated. It was an understanding within the family, she repeated. An understanding you never once communicated to your daughter? That's correct. She should have known. Barbara tilted her head. Your Honor, I'm not aware of any telepathic obligations under family law. A ripple of muffled laughter spread through the courtroom. Even the judge's lips twitched slightly. My mother flushed crimson. When my father took the stand, his testimony was even worse for their case. Under gentle but persistent questioning, he admitted that the lawsuit was about teaching Isabela a lesson and reminding her of family loyalty. His words hung in the air like poison. Barbara turned back to the judge. So this lawsuit isn't about property or finances. It's about control. The judge scribbled notes, her frown never lifting. By the time Daniel was called, the tension was unbearable. He slouched in the witness chair, trying to look unaffected. When asked when he first learned his parents were buying him a house, he shrugged. I don't know, it was just kind of understood. Barbara pressed. But you told your friend specifically that they were buying you a house in your sister's neighborhood months before she purchased. How did you know about that neighborhood? I just liked it, he mumbled. And when did you tell your parents that's where you wanted to live? Maybe last Christmas. Barbara's voice sharpened. Last Christmas, months after your sister had already closed on her home. So this was never your parents' idea. It was yours, after she had already purchased? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I guess. The cracks were obvious now. Their entire narrative was unraveling under the weight of their own contradictions. When the judge called a recess, I finally exhaled. Barbara placed a hand on my shoulder. "They've built their case on sand," she whispered, "and it's already washing away." As I stepped out of the courtroom into the cold air of the courthouse steps, I realized something I hadn't before. For the first time in years, the truth wasn't just inside me. It was on record, and soon it would set me free. When the recess ended, I walked back into the courtroom with my pulse steady, but my thoughts sharp. The walls no longer seemed so suffocating. Instead, they felt like witnesses to a truth that had been buried for years and was finally clawing its way into the open. My parents were huddled with their lawyer, whispering fiercely. My mother's face was red with indignation. My father's jaw clenched tight. And Daniel looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. His confidence had cracked the moment Barbara caught him in his contradiction. The bailiff called for silence, and the session resumed. The judge adjusted her glasses and said, "Before we continue, let me be clear. This case has already revealed serious inconsistencies. I expect precise answers from this point forward." Barbara leaned close to me, her voice low but confident. "This is where they collapse. Just let it happen." Their lawyer tried again, this time pushing the idea that even if there was no written proof, family loyalty created an implied contract. The words sounded desperate, almost comical in their weakness. The judge cut him off. "An implied contract? Between parents and their adult daughter, regarding property she purchased independently? Counselor, I would advise you to tread carefully. The law does not operate on vague family expectations." My parents stiffened. Their narrative, once so convincing to neighbors and acquaintances, was unraveling in front of them under the cold scrutiny of the court. Barbara stood. "Your Honor, at this point, the plaintiff's entire case rests on emotional coercion disguised as legal claim. We ask that the court review the evidence we've submitted, decades of my client's self-reliance, her spotless financial records, and the plaintiff's own contradictory testimony." The judge nodded. "Proceed." Barbara rolled out the second box of evidence. Box 2 contains employer statements, letters from professors, tax records filed independently since she was 17, bank accounts with no parental contributions. Everything demonstrates that Isabela Torres built her life on her own terms. This lawsuit is not about money. It's about control. Her words landed like a gavel strike. Then Barbara did something that made the air shift. She asked permission to recall me briefly. "Isabela," she said gently when I sat back down, "can you explain, in your own words, what it means to sit here today, defending your right to keep a home you earned?" I swallowed hard. "It means that I've spent half my life proving myself to people who never believed in me. I worked 2 jobs as a teenager, studied until my eyes burned, skipped vacations, skipped everything that looked like an easy path, because I wanted freedom. And the moment I finally achieved it, my family tried to strip it away. Not because they helped me build it, but because they couldn't stand the idea that I built it without them." The courtroom was silent. My mother's eyes darted away, my father rubbed his temple, and Daniel stared down at the floor. Barbara gave a small nod, satisfied. No further questions. Their lawyer scrambled to regain ground, calling my mother again in a desperate attempt to salvage sympathy. She wept this time, claiming that everything she had done was for her son's future, that she had been misunderstood. But Barbara's cross-examination was merciless. "Mrs. Torres," she said calmly, "are you aware that your son has accumulated more than $30,000 in credit card debt under your names?" My mother froze. Her tears stopped instantly. The courtroom rustled with whispers. "Is it not true," Barbara continued, "that the financial strain of supporting Daniel's lifestyle is the real reason you attempted to force your daughter into giving up her property?" My father shifted uncomfortably, his silence damning. The judge looked unimpressed. "Answer the question, Mrs. Torres." My mother's lips trembled. We did what we thought was best." Barbara's voice was unyielding. "For him, not for her." The tension snapped like a thread pulled too tight. My parents' entire facade collapsed in that moment. They weren't protecting Daniel's future. They were protecting their pride. Barbara closed her binder with finality. Your Honor, the defense rests. The judge leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. Very well. I'll review everything presented and render my decision shortly. But let me say this now. The behavior I've witnessed here is deeply troubling. As the court adjourned for the day, I felt a strange mixture of exhaustion and clarity. This wasn't just a legal battle, it was a reckoning. Years of favoritism, manipulation, and silence had been dragged into the light. Outside the courthouse, Barbara turned to me with a rare softness in her eyes. You did more than defend your house today, Isabela. You defended your story, and no judge can take that away from you now. For the first time in weeks, my chest loosened enough for a deep breath. The storm wasn't over yet, but the tide had turned. Tomorrow the judge would deliver her verdict. But in my heart, I already knew. No matter what they threw at me, my life was mine. And they couldn't rewrite that. The final day of the hearing arrived with a sky heavy and gray, as though the world itself was holding its breath. I stood outside the courthouse in my navy blue suit, clutching a folder, though Barbara had told me I wouldn't need to present anything else. My hands weren't shaking this time. Whatever happened, I knew I had told the truth. Barbara walked beside me, her usual calm presence radiating strength. Today, we close this chapter, she said. I nodded, grateful for her steadiness. Inside, the courtroom was quieter than before, stripped of the frantic energy that had filled it during testimony. My parents sat rigid at the plaintiff's table. My father's shoulders sagged slightly, his confidence eroded. My mother wore a mask of icy defiance, though I caught the flicker of unease in her eyes. Daniel slouched in the back row, tapping his phone screen as if none of this mattered. The judge entered, her gaze sharp as it swept across the room. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of finality. I have reviewed all evidence, testimony, and documents presented in this case. I find the claims brought forward by Thomas and Isabela Torres against their daughter, Isabela Torres, to be entirely without merit. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. My parents froze. The judge continued, her tone growing firmer. This court dismisses the plaintiff's complaint with prejudice. Furthermore, I grant the defendant's counterclaim for recovery of legal fees. The plaintiffs will bear full responsibility for the costs incurred as a result of this frivolous litigation. Barbara's hand touched mine briefly under the table, a quiet signal of victory, but the judge wasn't finished. Ordinarily, I leave personal commentary out of rulings. But in this matter, I feel compelled. Ms. Torres, you have demonstrated resilience, independence, and integrity. Your financial record and testimony show extraordinary determination in building a life without parental support. Mr. and Mrs. Torres, rather than celebrate your daughter's accomplishments, you sought to punish her through deceit. The court strongly recommends you reflect on the consequences of prioritizing pride over family. Her words hung in the air like a sentence heavier than any fine. My mother's lips parted as if to argue, but no sound came. My father lowered his gaze to the floor, as though the truth had finally broken through the armor he had worn for years. I exhaled, long and steady. The weight that had pressed on my chest for months seemed to dissolve in that moment. My home was safe. My independence was vindicated. And the narrative my parents had built for so long was shattered, not just privately, but publicly. As the courtroom emptied, Daniel slipped out first, avoiding my eyes. My parents followed, their lawyer trailing behind them with the expression of a man who knew his clients had doomed themselves. I didn't watch them leave. For once, their exit didn't matter to me. Barbara packed her files with efficient precision, then turned to me. You did this, Isabela. I fought the legal battle, but you fought the life battle that made it winnable. Tears pricked at my eyes, but I managed a small smile. I didn't just win my house today. I won myself outside on the courthouse steps. Aunt Sophia was waiting. She embraced me tightly, her voice fierce in my ear. You stood your ground. I've never been prouder. That night, back in my house, I sat on the back porch with a cup of tea, watching the sun dip behind the neighborhood rooftops. The yard was quiet. the air cool, the silence finally peaceful instead of suffocating. I thought about the years of sacrifices, the long shifts, the skipped celebrations. I thought about every time I had been told that Daniel mattered more, that my dreams were selfish. And now, here I was, not only surviving, but thriving. The lawsuit had been an attempt to erase me, to fold me back into a story where I never had a voice. Instead, it had forced me to speak louder than ever. It had revealed the truth, to them, to the court, and most importantly, to myself. I knew the scars of this fight would linger. Family wounds don't heal neatly. But I also knew something stronger had taken root in me. The certainty that my worth would never again be determined by their approval. For the first time in years, I felt free. If you've ever had to fight for your place, if you've ever been told that your achievements don't belong to you, let this be your reminder. You are allowed to claim your story. Drop a comment below and tell me how you've stood your ground. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because your voice matters, even when others try to silence it. As the last light faded, I whispered the words I wished I could have told my younger self. You were always enough, and they can never take that from you.